past 6 lessons, we've gone into how Photoshop works to help you manipulate, change, create, repair, and embellish images. And you should by now have a pretty good idea of how to do each one of those things. But then what? What do you do with these PSD files? How does Photoshop fit into a larger picture of the digital workflow? Well, that's what this is all about. Remember, Photoshop is not an island. It's a part of a larger workflow. Photoshop works hand in hand with Illustrator and InDesign, as well as Dreamweaver and other Creative Suite applications. It's really important to keep in mind that each application has its own specialization and purpose. In some cases, the range of that specialization is quite broad. Photoshop does a lot of stuff. We know that from this course. It can do print images, web images, images for video, animation. In fact, lots of things that were a bit out of the purview of this introductory course. We learned here the fundamental functions of Photoshop, of creating images for the print and for web. And believe me, that's a lot in and of itself. So in this context corner, I want to do 2 things. First, I want to introduce you to an application that never really gets its due. That's Adobe Bridge. Adobe Bridge is the unfortunate stepsister application that no one really talks about, but when put into action can save you time and help you to get a better understanding of what your images look like, how they were made, and even how to use them in conjunction with other applications. So in Photoshop, I'd like you to select File, Browse in Bridge. It's right there at the top. This action will open a new application. We'll be leaving Photoshop for the time being. Adobe Bridge is a single window workspace with a number of panes. It's very customizable, allowing you to change the order and sizing of each pane as you like. The main function of Bridge, though, is to let you see your files, which professionals like to call assets. So you'll hear me using that term every so often. On the top, you'll see a breadcrumb listing, another professional term, that will show you the location that where you are currently viewing. And if you look at the left-hand pane, you'll also see a familiar hierarchical navigation system. You can dig down through the folders on the left to find the folder where your assets reside. How's that for professional speak? In plain speech, that means click through the folders to find your images. I'm looking at the folder I used while creating this lesson. You'll see a bunch of original images and some we may have worked on. If you select one of the thumbnails in the content pane in the center, that image's preview will appear on the right in the preview pane. Take note of all the information that also appears below the preview image. That's called Exif Data. Every digital image stores information about its creation, its format, its resolution, and really a lot more. And all that information that is invisible to you while you're working in Photoshop also can be vital to you before you begin working on it. Exif Data can tell you about what camera was used for an image, if the flash was used, what the f-stop was, if the white balance was on, exposure settings, focal length, and so on. Nowadays, with Geo-Tracking, it can give you information about where the photo was taken, latitude, longitude, even altitude. You can also assign information if it's not already there. You can input photographer or artist's names. In the case of digital compositions, that will be you, the artist, as well as copyright information and rights and commentary. So you see, Exif Data can be very, very important. As you work further with Photoshop and with other applications in tandem with Photoshop, these considerations will become very apparent to you. Now, once rearranged, your main center pane should look something like what I'm showing you here. A large preview with smaller thumbnails below. As you select one or multiple thumbnails, they will appear in the main preview panel above. Selecting multiple files will let you make direct side-by-side comparisons of images. So if you're trying to decide which image works well with another one, or which would be best to work on in Photoshop, this is where you would do that. It's about informed visual choices. So that's nice. Bridge lets you preview a whole folder of images before you even open them up in Photoshop. Of course, once you do choose your images, you can open them in Photoshop directly by double-clicking in the content pane thumbnails. We'll get back to this in a moment. Of course, we use Bridge for more than just sorting and choosing images. Bridge is pretty cool. Under the Tools menu in Bridge, we also have a number of other functions. The first one is Batch Rename. Now, this is a powerful and easy way to rename all the related files in a group, say from one client or assigned to one project. Select the files you'd like to rename, then choose Tools, Batch Rename, and then just batch rename them. You'll rename every one of those images in that selection. The ensuing dialog window gives you many options on how to stylize the renaming, what format to put it in, Windows, Mac, Unix, as well as either moving the selected images or copying them to another folder. Bridge is like the back office for Photoshop, where you get your paperwork in order. There's one feature in Bridge that you need to know about for the ensuing exercise, and that is how to create a contact sheet in PDF from multiple image files. At the top of the Bridge window is the list of Workspace layout presets, similar to what we find in Photoshop. Remember, Essentials, Typography, 3D, etc. Instead of a pull-down, these presets are situated in a pull-out menu. Change the preset from Essentials to Output. This will rearrange the panels so that you'll have access to PDF output settings. In the Content pane, select the multiple images you want in your contact sheet. Now select the PDF button in the Output pane. Choose a template from the drop-down menu. Check how each setting appears by clicking on the Refresh Preview button. Also, walk through the document and layout panels below. Choose an appropriate paper size for your printer, and if you're only planning to send this via email, as we are in the exercise, choose an appropriate size for viewing on a monitor. I'll leave that to you. Each change you make requires you to refresh the preview though. You'll see your changes in the preview panel immediately, so make sure that you have a layout that you like. When you have a layout that works, check the View PDF after Save, then click Save. Acrobat will open the saved PDF and you can review your work. There are two other aspects of Bridge I want you to become familiar with. The first is the Tools menu. Inside Photoshop, there are some advanced batch and process commands. You'll find them in Photoshop under File, Automate. They let you automate certain functions. These are somewhat advanced commands that work well for when you have more than, say, 10 or so images that need a uniform process applied to them. If you continue on to the Advanced Photoshop course, you'll learn more about them. But what I want to point out to you here is that you can access those same functions before you even open up Photoshop, while you're still browsing your files in Bridge. The one you may find interesting at this point is the Load Files into Photoshop Layers. This lets you take multiple files and combine them into one large Photoshop file, each individual image on its own layer. Okay, now let's open up Photoshop. Once in Photoshop, I want you to choose File, Browse in Mini Bridge. That's just below the other one that said Browse in Bridge. After all that talk about Bridge as a standalone application, you should now have a good understanding of the enclosed Mini Bridge feature inside Photoshop itself. Mini Bridge is a curtailed version of the larger application, but it lets you peruse your files in its own panel without ever leaving Photoshop. It doesn't have all the power and functionality of the full-sized application, but it does let you do some cool things. The most important feature that I use, aside from letting you compare images before you open them, is the ability to open files on their own layers within one document. When you're compiling multiple images in one space, this is a nice way to get everything in the same place, on their own layers, ready to go. Mini Bridge will normally present to you as a panel at the bottom of your application frame, but just as with all other panels, you can tear it off and resize it to fit your needs as a floating panel. Within the panel are settings for showing your file names, document sizes, etc. But let's get right to the functionality. Select one image thumbnail and double-click. It will open in the main canvas area. Now let's add another image to that file. Select another thumbnail and drag it directly onto the canvas from the Mini Bridge area. It will open within the current document but on its own layer. That is a simple way of combining your images. Now, Mini Bridge may not be an essential feature, but it does help you when you're working with multiple files that you want to composite. Like its larger sibling, it also gives you a sense of the array of assets that you have to work with in your project all at once. You now have a good sense of the breadth of Photoshop and its tools. You're able to create stunning and dramatic images, correct, colorize, and retouch ones that need repair, or embellish certain other images. You can put images together to create fantastic relationships that may not exist in real life or in history. In other words, you can Photoshop. At the beginning of this context corner, I repeated that Photoshop doesn't work in isolation. It's not an island. It does its thing, and then it shares with other applications. While you may or may not find expertise in InDesign, Illustrator, or Dreamweaver, it is important for you to know that those applications have their own jobs to do as well, and that they work in concert with Photoshop on almost every job you work on. When we created key art for our movie posters, we laid in the majority of image work, but were reticent about using the type. Since we were working only in Photoshop as in a laboratory, we added the credit text within the application. But in reality, you'd find that for the final production, we'd send that file, layers and all, to InDesign, where we'd replace the credit text with typography from within InDesign. You see, typography is one of InDesign's specialties. When we did our colorizing composites, I showed you the key art I'd done for DVD packaging. If you look back at the final product versus the key art, you'll see the addition of pricing and sales text. All of that was done after Photoshop. Logo design is usually created in vector, not raster. That's partly because of the limitations of raster. We went into that in the first lesson. But remember, raster art is not resolution dependent. Vector is resolution independent. So creating a logo in Photoshop would mean that you'd have to make a perfectly sized version for every use. The same file couldn't be used for the business card and building signage, say. So if you develop it in Illustrator, you'd be able to use the exact same file for both. So those are the differences. Illustrator files, though, can be used within Photoshop. While we didn't go into it too deeply in this course, using smart objects as a way to keep live vectors linked to and working within Photoshop, the advanced Photoshop course goes into this in a lot more depth than we do have room here. By using the place command, file place, you're bringing a file into Photoshop Canvas and letting you resize, add certain effects like drop shadows and things like that, but not actually being able to change the file itself. In order to change the file, you access its native file through the Layers panel. Don't let me get carried away here though, because that's a whole other lesson and I'm trying to sum this up. Photoshop is at once a robust standalone format and design environment, and it's an essential link in any kind of workflow that includes vector, HTML, CSS, and other forms. Each format and type of file has its own limitations as well as its own boon. It is vital that you understand both to get the most out of all of them. The skills you've developed here in this course should stand you in good stead as a designer, as a photographer, and as a graphic artist. I hope that you're inspired by your new skills enough to continue exploring and experimenting. Remember, there is never one single way to do anything in Photoshop. There are thousands of solutions for each problem and project. Build on each solution that you find, and then, I beg of you, find more solutions.
Did you like this video? Then subscribe today to stay up to date on our channel or follow us on Google+, Twitter, and Facebook. Visit sessions.edu for more info on classes and admissions. Also, don't forget to check out the links to free downloadable content in the description. Thanks for watching.